you're going to focus, have a lot of focus at the moment on the sort of primary MIS solution, or actually the overall proposition, I guess. So in that market space, one of the obviously the biggest sort of competitors, I guess, and one of the ones that have grown quite quickly is ScholarPack. So do you see ScholarPack as your main sort of threat in that space?
Or? I think what's quite interesting, if you look at the data that's there, and I'll give a shout out to Josh Perry, who does some wonderful data analysis. If you start looking at that data, you sort of see the sort of the market movers, if you like, particularly in space. We're looking at Arbor, Bromcom, and ScholarPack. Now, obviously, Arbor and ScholarPack are now under the same umbrella. But I think those three solutions are really sort of, they're grabbing quite a lot of the space left by SIMS. I mean, you look at SIMS is definitely dropping, particularly in the primary area, secondary slightly less so. But that's sort of where we're seeing quite a lot of movement. And we've sort of maintained roughly our sort of user base, but it is a lot more competitive now, I think, in that space, particularly with those new entrants.
Yeah, and when you look at your differentiator, so obviously there's some new products coming in as well. So you've got I know iSAMS was already out there, but you've now got Iris with iSAMS. Compass has just announced. So going back to doing the shout out to Josh Perry, so he's obviously now trying to run with Compass as well, which is again already got referenceability in Australia and in Ireland.
Yeah.
So where do you see your differentiator? Where do you see your difference and what you can offer the customer base, which these other companies can't yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think what we're looking at is how do we make our systems work together with other systems. So RM's quite a big company, if you like, and we're not just about the MIS solutions, but it's about a whole package, if you like. So it's not, we as RM make sure that our sort of solutions work together in a slightly wider way. You talked about the RM Unify, the single sign-on that can clearly be used not only for logging onto your MIS, but can be used across the school. And can be used with parents and teachers and all the rest of it. And then, we do things like, help customers move to the cloud. And also it may not be sort of directly the MIS space, but as a company, we have these capabilities, if you like.
Yeah.
So I think it is around that area. And then also just, as I said, making sure that we satisfy and delight our customers. And I think that's the key. It's not just about getting a bunch of people in and going, let's do this development. It is around making sure that we have that good experience for the customer, and not just on the sale point of view, but also long term. And that because ultimately, if you don't delight your customers, they'll be looking elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. So in some ways, I spoke about RM was in the sense of being the whole school partner almost. Feels like it's where you're going, in the sense of actually all the solutions that you require within the school, and that could be to do with learning, not just MIS. It could be in the classroom, it could be in the office or wherever. You want to be almost that single partner, which that's a great vision, but also that's got its own challenges, or that's really ambitious as well.
It is, that's right, and I think it is very much about satisfying that sort of MIS or management solution space. But I think as a company, we are born and bred in the education market, and we've got a lot of experience in a range of different things, whether it be the ISP or the services we provide to schools. And so it's looking at how we can sort of weave that together in a complete package for our customers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think some of the others are also sort of trying that, but they're either focusing heavily on the management, or maybe like Juniper, where there's a lot of focus on the assessment piece. And they all seem to have their strengths in a single place. Iris absolutely got finance in maths, probably the most dominant finance package in maths. But I suppose none of them have this. This is as a school or a MAT will provide you everything.
Yeah,
I think it's great.
Well, I think the customers, particularly MATs, like to deal with less companies. They prefer to deal with because it's easier. There's no sort of us and them when a problem happens. It's it sits squarely on your shoulders, and you've got to sort it out, and they've got a direct line. And I think, to me, any relationship is about a partnership. It's, you know, it's where I've always found that when we work with schools, if we can partner with them and have an open discussion, there's a bit of tolerance on both sides, it always gets to a much better place than if it's like, you know, I'm a supplier of goods and you're the consumer, and there's not really much dialogue. Then, you know, it doesn't work as well. And I think very much in RM, we're always about partnership, you know, making things work, having discussions, being open, being honest, and moving forward.
Yeah, no, I'm very much, you know, up for that sort of thing. I think, you know, I've always said, you know, in education, everything is about the relationship. You know, nobody I don't think in education likes being sold to. I don't think necessarily anyone does, full stop, but ultimately, especially in education, you know, I think they don't like being sold to. They want to build up relationships and people they can trust.
Yeah,
I think that's very, very, very important.
Absolutely. Well, it's, you know, at the end of the day, it's a people-driven business. You know, I mean, yes, they have budgets and all the rest of it, but at the end of the day, you know, they're dealing with children. It's a relationship. It's emotional. It's challenging. It's exciting. It's rewarding. And, you know, I think that they, you know, the people in that business, that's where their skills lie. And I think, you know, we recognise that by trying to encourage that sort of debate and discussion and partnership with what we do.
Excuse me.
That's
so
right.
in relation to the overall market, so you talked about, you know, lots of companies are coming in, consolidating.
Yeah.
Do you see that continuing? Do you see that as being an area where that's not going to stop? So more Ps are going to come in potentially, or the Ps are around are going to basically buy up more solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. It's like most markets, isn't it? You sort of get a lot of entrants at the beginning, and then you get a lot of acquisitions, and then you sort of get, you know, you get consolidation. So, I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot of customers around. There's still a lot of, you know, again, I mean, Sims is the dominant player still in the market. And, you know, depending what happens with them, you know, they'll probably strengthen their offer, given what's happened with that company. So, you know, I guess there's still an amount of money in the market that, as you said, the PEs are kind of looking at and eyeing up. And it's, you know, in these sort of troubled times, it's a fairly stable part of the, you know, it's a fairly stable market, because we're always going to have schools, we're always going to have children, you know, and the government's always going to fund that. There may be sort of ups and downs, but nevertheless, you've still got those fundamentals there. And as I said at the beginning, they're essential. You can't really get away without them, so you kind of have to have them. And I think that's probably where some of the PE houses have been looking and saying, okay, well, you know, where's your must-haves in a school, and how big is that market, and what can we do to address that? I think, you know, it's in my mind, competition in some ways is a good thing, because it makes you sharpen up your act. It certainly made us having to sharpen up our act, and that's fine. I mean, we recognise that's what we need to do. You know, and I think it's exactly the same for Sims. And I think, you know, that's, I'm sure that now they've got, you know, with the investment in Sims, that they'll be looking and thinking, okay, how do we sort of move this forwards and keep our customers, because they've still got a lot of customers. It's quite interesting on some of the Josh Perry research. You start looking at how well known are these companies in a school, and Sims has got about, it's something like a 98% recognition.
Yeah.
I think we're around sort of the 30s, you know, and there's quite a lot of us around sort of that. But, you know, still you think, well, that's still a big gap of people who you know, never heard of us.
I agree, and you know, it's strangely we're doing something similar as well, which should come out soon. But it is interesting how the market is still very focused on the sort of Sims sort of solution. I think.
Yeah.
Some of that is to do with its model, though, and in the sense of lots of local authorities, you know, basically supporting it, protecting it in lots of ways. I think, you know, and you know, just because of the fact is, you know, they're basically selling their services into those schools and their sim services. Yeah. So ultimately, there's lots of that happening. So the schools, and also I think sometimes we forget that schools, their day-to-day is about teaching. You know, the MIS actually is not fundamentally, even though, don't get me wrong, you know, in my time I'm sort of going, this is so important. But also for a school, you know, Johnny basically grazing his knee or somebody being sick in the corridor becomes much more important than typing in some stuff into an MIS.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that the sort of management solutions almost need to some extent to be invisible.
Yeah,
they just need to work, and they need to do the things you need them to do well. and that sort of, and that's really what schools are looking for. I think they want systems that work simply, are effective, and deliver the information or the processes they need as and when they need them. And I think that's that's sort of maybe the sort of the where we kind of need to be looking at is how do we make that happen. I think just going back to what was interesting about your sort of SIMS point. I mean, I think SIMS did a very, very good job about integrating themselves well with the local authority, and to be fair, there was an absence of competition when they did that, and therefore they took a lot of the marketplace. And you look at Scotland, there's only one system in Scotland, CMIS, for the MIS, but that's actually owned by the local authorities as opposed to a private company.
Yeah.
But I think and what as you say, trying to show the benefits of your management solutions to schools, if you don't start talking to the local authority, particularly in the finance area, then I think it is quite challenging. And because we've had it a few times where as you say, the local authorities are quite protected because they're worried about losing their teams, losing revenues, and all those types of things. And I think there's almost three players there in that purchase cycle. There's the supplier, there's the school, and there's the authority.
Yeah.
And that's still, and I know authorities that do brilliant jobs with their schools and do really, really high value work for their schools, and I know other authorities where they've been decimated by cuts, and therefore that whole conversation is a lot more challenging. And it's just I think you've got to work with your environment and recognise the sort of key stakeholders there. But it is quite interesting, and as I said, SIM did a lot of work in embedding the sort of the making it easy for the data from the school to flow through to the authority. I think that's one of their real strengths, or making that transfer of information really easy. And I think we need to learn from that. We need to be equally as easy or even better.
Sure. I think it's interesting about the authorities, or sort of staying on to the local authorities a bit, because I think that market is also changing. There has been even consolidation there, with SBS and Strictly joining together, and, Judicium as part of that group as well, and then you've also got Babcock that was in Surrey. So there's some consolidation in that market happening, especially around the commercial support teams. And I wonder, do you think it's going to happen more as well? Especially as you just said, the local authorities are if you're a support team within the local authority, then ultimately the local authorities are shrinking. So if they're shrinking, then the support will also potentially shrink as well.
I think it's interesting because you've got some different models. So Hertfordshire, which we work quite closely with, they've sort of spun off Hearts for Learning, so that is owned by the authority, but it is actually a separate entity.
Yeah.
And then certainly, we see a lot of particularly of our partners, particularly in finance area, people who used to work at the local authority but now set up their own business, and so they know the local authority well, got good relationships, and they provide the service that way. And then you still have those authorities which still directly provide a service to the schools, so they buy on behalf of their schools and then provide a service on top, and so wrap it up as a package. So I think there are different models, but there's very much a challenge for the authorities in terms of finances. They've kind of got to make it work, so they've got to become a bit more commercial, to survive really, and be competitive. And I think all of the people in the MIS space recognise that, and they are having those dialogues, and they've kind of got to work with the local authorities. I think it's trying to sort of move this tanker and turn it around is going to take a while. And we, I think it's quite interesting because you have that whole the MAT space. We've got to be academies and all the rest of it, and you get a lot of talk around the power of big MATs and the purchasing power of big MATs, but most of the local authorities were much bigger than the biggest MAT, and had a lot of buying power there. So to me, that argument doesn't really stack up. But I think that what the MATs bring is a different environment where it is much more sort of centrally controlled, more so than the local authority model, because the responsibility and the finances, if you like, sit fairly and is squarely with the MAT.
Yeah.
And so that's brought a different focus. And it's quite interesting with the somebody I was talking to, sort of going off a bit, but I was talking to a head teacher. Also, it's about the types of people that you have leading schools in a MAT versus in the local authority. When I was chair of governors at our local school, the head was from the local authority, and if you're in a local authority, you had to fight and scrap for money. So that person was that type of person. But I think working in a MAT, you have to be much more collaborative, and I think that's where it's a very that sort of has been described to me. You kind of need different types of people to work in a MAT environment than because I think they're much more hands-on at the MAT level coming down. And I've worked in both. It was sort of the school I was at, we converted to a MAT, so I've kind of worked in both environments. But it is quite interesting how they're going, and the centralisation of the management solutions in a MAT is much closer than it ever was in the local authority, particularly when you start looking at things like trust analytics and all those sort of type areas, which are front and centre pretty much of a lot of the conversations we have in that area.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I fully agree. I think I was talking to Rowena as one of these interviews, and she's sort of a MAT leader, and from her perspective, a lot of companies don't fully understand the MAT still yet. They created their solutions from a school perspective first of all, which is understandable, and then they're trying to make it into a multi-school system rather than focusing purely on the MAT and then them focusing down. And from her perspective, there are lots of things that they've taken away from the schools and they are directly managing. I think in one of her MATs, I think it was DRET, where they basically called the head teachers the sort of, you're the learning leaders basically, rather than don't worry about the business stuff. That will happen at the centrally.
Yes.
So I think I agree with you. I think the focus of working with MATs, I think, is different than with local authority, in the sense that you have to treat them as the centralized area and understand their needs, and then drive down into the school as a sort of like as a not an afterthought, because that's wrong, but as a sort of the MAT itself leads on the requirements basically.
Yeah, and I think where my opinion is that where MATs work really well, coming back to our previous sort of conversation, they allow the teachers to do the teaching, and that sort of management stuff. They kind of say, well, let us do that. We'll take it out your hands. Certainly going back to my local school, we sort of eventually, the bursar was managing 2 schools, and then she left, and actually the MAT said, well, let us do that. Let us do that. Let's do that, and they get. And I think the good side of that is that you kind of get people with really good skills in to do that. So you can get accountants in and all that type of stuff, which a school could never afford, to help with that side of things. And just allow the school to because really what you want to do is provide the resources to the schools to allow them to teach. I mean, that was always my view. What the other side of it is quite interesting is on the governance side. Having been a governor on both sides, you certainly very much quickly notice that as a governor, you don't have as much responsibility in a MAT as you would have done in a local authority school. So it's a very different governance model there. I think I think there's some brilliant MATs out there, and I think there's some MATs which really struggle, and I think there's some brilliant authorities out there, and I think there's some authorities that really struggle, and it's trying to sort of help whichever one you're talking to get the best out of what they've got and move forwards.
Yeah, I agree, and you're right. There are lots of different shapes and sizes of MATs. Ultimately they get some really small MATs. You still get MATs of one school, in a single school, trying to protect themselves from going under a multi school system. I know a couple of those as well. So they're acting within as a school. They're not acting as a multi-academy trust really. However, if you look at the Gavin Williamson sort of direction he wants to go in, then it's definitely bigger MATs. He's definitely looking at some of these single school MATs actually eventually going under a bigger umbrella, and you can sort of understand the reason why from a government perspective. I'm not sure what it looks like from an education perspective, but from a
I think it's interesting because it's very mixed. I think there's lots of evidence on both sides, and of course one side will bring out one set of evidence and the other side will bring out the other. I think the success of any organisation is what are we trying to do? And in the school, to me, it's all about the children and how you can teach the children and better themselves, their understanding and their capabilities going forward. So they come out of school, with good skills that are relevant in society, and they're rounded people. That's the sort of the ultimate dream, if you like. And how do you manage them through that journey? How do you sort of make sure that you understand what's going on? And I think that those types of things are quite prevalent, particularly in the sort of assessment space, which I think is transitioning into the MIS space. I think it's not just about doing your statutory returns or whatever it is through holding those statutory results in your MIS. It's about a whole lot of other data that could be there, and making that and being able to process that, so you give back to the people who want the data in the right chunks and the right sizes for their role. And I think that's really important as well. And I think we're seeing quite a bit of that. That people that we talk to, they're interested in assessment and go, well, what are the capabilities of your system? Can we maybe move the stuff in there and not have two systems to do this? How do we move that conversation? It's a very interesting space, and quite a nuanced space as well, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, no, I think there's going to be lots of change for sure. I think there's going to be lots of change in the market and the way it's structured, but also I think all the sort of solutions out there, I think based on what's already happening, I think there will be a lot of different sort of propositions. In fact, actually, I could potentially see the MIS going back to your point where, you just don't want to know it's there really, you just know it's working and it's happening. You could almost see the MIS becoming less important, and actually a data layer being more important, or the finance or something else might be far more important than the MIS, but the MIS is almost the platform, because it holds so much data on children.
Yeah, and I think there's a level of flexibility there as well. I mean, you talk about data, that's a huge area, and what I remember talking to sort of PS Financials sort of, a while back, quite a few years ago now, and they said one of the key things they were working on was a data warehouse. And I think that was quite visionary, really, bringing lots of data together in a central area and then allowing you to query it in whatever way you wanted, and be able to combine data from different products or different sources into a way that has meaning. We've seen a lot of that. There are third parties out there that do that. It is quite key, because it's all about providing the right data, understanding what the data is measuring, and then working out what you need to do about it, if anything. What does it mean? And I think that's a big area to understand in school, because particularly children are hit with so much information. Being able to process that information, understand the nuances behind it, where's it coming from, and it is really key in the modern world, because everything's online. Where do you get your data from?
I agree. I think other industries are further ahead than we are in education in relation to this. There are so many. You look at in retail, they're using data all the time to understand buying behaviors, and what things should be associated as what. So, you can get the more. People buy more because of it. Where should you put stock on the shelves? All those things are basically based on data. And yet in education, I think we're lacking behind, and yet we have so much really strong information, especially in MIS and other systems, to give some further insight to to these educators. I was talking to Duncan Baldwin, who used to be part of ASCL, and one of these sessions, and he worked with a company called Ask Eddie, and that was very much, they got a bunch of school leaders together, and they just looked at data. There was attendance data in this instance, but the example they gave was on the 14th of December, attendance dropped on the 14th of December, and it's like, why is this? And some of the schools were in deprived areas, and it's because it was National Christmas Jumper Day.
Brilliant.
And the reason behind it is because some kids couldn't afford the pound, or they didn't have a Christmas jumper, or whatever it might be. And you sort of look at that and go, that sort of information should be easily readily available to, to heads or to senior leaders, or even to MATs, to now enable them to make decisions.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I think that there is an argument that the measurement of education and all those types of things is quite complicated. I think there are some things which are sort of binary. Do you attend school or not? But whether you've understood that point or not is probably is much more nuanced. But if you sort of take your analogy there, I mean, I always think of things like the the national grid providers, the people that provide us electricity, they have very sophisticated systems. They're very good at predicting how much electricity people want, on certain days. And if we can sort of take some of that thinking and sort of predictability, if you like, to help inform, as you said. And I think, the other thing to me is if you sort of take an instance of children at risk, we talked to a lot of schools and children, what do you want from me? Well, I want you to be able to help me manage my children at risk. So attendance is a very key thing in children at risk. Are they in school? Are they not? So what do you want your system to do? If they're not in school, what do you want your system to do? Can you automatically get it to create some kind of form of communication and send that out to whoever needs it? Could be a parent, or could be they can log on to see whether their child's at school or not, and if they're engaged. All those sort of types of systems, if we can make them more easily usable or more automated, then I think we can provide value to schools and take away some of the well, I've got to go to the attendance list, I've got to go and speak to Miss so and so to find out whether Johnny's in, and what it comes back to the flagging when you need to take action. It's that that sort of type of thinking that I think is quite key in some areas.
I know, I agree. And I think even going one step further, the sort of Alexa thing, or no, Amazon thing, where you're looking at this bunch of kids, but did you know that these bunch of kids are also very, very close to hitting these sort of these KPIs that you're looking at? I think that sort of intelligence is definitely required.
Yes, that's right. And I think, it was interesting going back to the things like the Fisher Family Trust data, how, the kind of data they were looking at, they were sort of looking at predictions from sort of point A to point B. It wasn't the reason for designing that data was not to say if you get a 2B or whatever here, that then you can get no more than a C at A level or whatever. It was more around exposing people to the fact there's a range, and just because they got 2B, it doesn't mean they have to get a C at A level. They could get an A. And here's the data to show that some people have gone on that path, and what we need to do is understand what's happened on that path as opposed to this path, so we can move the children, and support them in that direction. And it's the same, having that data there and trying to get decent analysis behind it, so people can understand what's going on and to be able to sort of intervene early before things sort of grow and become a bigger problem later on.